Some buses earned their reputation out on the road. Others lost theirs long before the first wheel ever touched pavement. And if you've spent a lifetime around garages, depots, or old Greyhound yards, you already know the truth. Sometimes the damage doesn't come from bad engineering or rough drivers. Sometimes it comes from inside the company walls. This list isn't about lemons or cheap builds. It's about the machines that could have been great, buses with real promise, until corporate politics, budget cuts, and rushed decisions turned them into cautionary tales. These weren't failures of steel or diesel. They were failures of leadership. So today we're opening the file drawer on 10 buses that were sabotaged by their own makers, whether anyone ever meant it or not. GMC RTS, the revolution that GM abandoned. For a moment in the mid-1970s, it looked like America was about to leap a full generation ahead. The GMC RTS wasn't just another city bus, it was a moonshot on wheels. Sleek lines, modular body panels, composite materials, and a futuristic frame that felt more aircraft than transit coach. But inside GM Truck and Bus, the house was divided. Half the division wanted to push the RTS forward, and the other half didn't want to raise a baby they never asked for. That split set the stage for everything that followed. Corporate ordered 40 to 60% of the original prototype budget slashed, forcing engineers to replace lightweight composites with heavier, cheaper steel. The rushed timeline, meant to beat AM General's Metropolitan, left QA struggling to keep up. And when the industry began whispering about low-floor designs, GM flat-out refused to let the RTS evolve. No redesign, no next step, no future. As GM prepared to exit the bus market entirely, the RTS was simply abandoned. Promising projects like the RTS 08 and the low-floor prototype were cut off midstream, and much of the R&D team was reassigned to truck programs. A revolution, quietly smothered by its own maker. Flxible 870, the bus ruined by corporate pressure. When Grumman bought Flxible in the late 70s, the goal wasn't patience or craftsmanship, it was spectacle. They wanted a brand new bus on the streets fast, something bold enough to prove the acquisition was worth every penny. So instead of the 4-year development window engineers requested, corporate slashed it down to 18 months. And from that moment on, the 870 never stood a chance. To cut costs, Grumman insisted on a lightweight aluminum frame paired with thin crossmembers, a structure the engineers warned would twist under real-world loads. Those warnings were dismissed. Durability testing, the long, punishing full-cycle gauntlet GM used on its proving grounds, was shortened or skipped entirely. The clock mattered more than the craft, and when the first frame cracks began appearing in New York and Boston, Grumman's instinct wasn't honesty. It was containment. They tried to downplay the failures, pushing blame toward drivers, agencies, even maintenance crews, anyone except the people who created the problem. The scandal only grew, dragging Flxible's reputation down with it. By the time a massive recall finally came, the damage was done. The 870 wasn't destroyed by bad design alone. It was destroyed by the corporate pressure that smothered every engineer's warning along the way. MCI MC-6, the masterpiece that Greyhound destroyed. Some buses are born from a committee. The MC-6 was born from a single customer, Greyhound. They wanted a long-distance coach unlike anything else on American highways. 102 inches wide, tall, smooth, powerful, and built to swallow miles without blinking. MCI delivered exactly that. But by the time the first MC-6s rolled out, Greyhound's leadership had changed, and the new executives were aligned with AM General, not MCI. The very company that demanded the bus had suddenly cooled on it. Greyhound fought the U.S. Department of Transportation for permission to run that extra width, and won. Then, almost unbelievably, they turned around and declared the coach too complex to maintain. MCI, owned by Greyhound at the time, had no power to push back. The Detroit Diesel 12V71 under the floor was a monster, strong, fast, and loud. But without proper training, documentation, or investment in maintenance infrastructure, it earned a reputation for running hot and being too much engine for the system they had. Within a few years, corporate issued the final blow. Stop supporting the MC-6 and shift all resources toward the simpler MC-5C. Just like that, one of the most ambitious American coaches ever built was cut down by the customer who requested it. GM New Look, late years. Killed by GM's refusal to modernize. By the late 1970s, the GM New Look had already earned its place in American transit history. It was dependable, familiar, and beloved by drivers who appreciated a bus that felt honest under their hands. But inside GM's corporate offices, the mood had shifted. The company was looking for the exit door, and the New Look, despite its proven track record, was quietly pushed aside. Engineers had sketched out low-floor concepts. They had proposals for new tooling, updated frames, and modernized systems. But GM refused to fund any of it. With plans to leave the bus business entirely, management shut the door on meaningful upgrades, including the powertrain improvements needed to meet the tightening emissions standards of the era. Marketing was even instructed not to promote the New Look aggressively. Selling too many buses would have forced GM to keep supporting a product line they no longer wanted. Instead, transit agencies were nudged toward the TMC RTS, allowing GM to streamline its fading presence in the industry. The result was a slow and deliberate starvation. The New Look didn't die from design flaws or lack of demand. It died because its own maker refused to let it evolve. A great bus left behind on purpose. NABI 416, 436, when corporate chaos destroys quality. If you ever worked around NABI buses in the 90s or early 2000s, you probably remember one thing. No two of them ever felt exactly alike. And there was a reason for that. These buses lived through not one, but three different corporate identities: Icarus, American Icarus, and finally NABI. Each transition brought a brand new set of quality standards, new managers, new suppliers, and a new idea of what good enough meant. Consistency never stood a chance. Cost-cutting ran deep. At the Alabama plant, many welders were new to the trade, handed big structural jobs before they had the experience to back it up. Instead of the proven European components the original designs were built around, corporate insisted on cheaper American substitutes, parts that didn't always mate well with the old Icarus architecture. Then came the rapid expansion. NABI pushed out more buses faster, stretching QA so thin that problems slipped through daily. But production kept ramping up because corporate valued volume over longevity. Even when quality control teams raised red flags, marketing pushed ahead, selling aggressively and promising reliability the factory couldn't deliver. In the end, it wasn't bad engineering that doomed the 416 and 436. It was the corporate chaos swirling above them, every misstep etched into the steel. Bluebird Q-Bus, the transit experiment Bluebird never supported. Every now and then, a company dips a toe into a market it doesn't truly want. The Bluebird Q-Bus was exactly that kind of machine. In the late 80s and early 90s, Bluebird was still the king of school buses, solid, yellow, and everywhere. Transit work, though? That was treated like a side hobby. The Q-Bus arrived with potential, but almost no support behind it. After the first version rolled out, R&D simply stopped. There were no follow-up improvements, no long-term engineering roadmap, no effort to refine the chassis or reinforce the body the way city service demanded. And without a proper transit parts and service network, agencies quickly found themselves scrambling for components or waiting weeks for repairs. Even worse, Bluebird barely promoted the Q-Bus to DOT officials or major transit agencies. Most buyers didn't even realize Bluebird had a serious urban coach on the market. Inside the company, the sales teams were split. The school bus division didn't want the transit line stealing attention or budget, so the Q-Bus never got the internal backing it needed. Without modernization, without marketing, and without a champion inside its own company, the Q-Bus faded fast. Not because it failed, but because Bluebird never let it succeed. Neoplan USA, AN 440, AN 460, the empire that imploded from within. For a brief moment, Neoplan USA looked like it might reshape American transit. Big factories, bold designs, and the prestige of a respected German parent company, on paper, it all seemed unstoppable. But inside the walls, the foundation was already cracking. Instead of growing slowly and training the workforce to German standards, U.S. leadership opened 4 factories at once, without enough seasoned engineers to keep quality under control. Training from Neoplan Germany, once the backbone of the brand, was shortened or skipped entirely to save money. Meanwhile, corporate pushed for heavy customization, promising each city its own special configuration. That decision overloaded engineering, strained manufacturing, and guaranteed that no 2 buses shared the same build quality. With no unified QA standard, every batch left the line with its own quirks: misaligned panels, wiring gremlins, air ride issues, cracked welds. As internal debts piled up, Neoplan USA cut material costs lower and lower, drifting even further from the robust European designs their reputation was built on. By the early 2000s, the disconnect was complete. The American operation wasn't just struggling, it was dragging down the Neoplan name worldwide. The AN 440 and AN 460 didn't fail because the concept was flawed. They failed because the empire collapsed from within, one rushed decision at a time. Scenicruiser. GM's own design process sabotaged it. To most Americans, the Scenicruiser was the face of Greyhound, a rolling postcard of the open road. But behind that iconic profile was a design process that never had a fair shot. GM, eager to deliver a showpiece coach, split the project between 2 separate teams, one for the body, one for the chassis. Those groups rarely worked side by side, and the company refused to slow down long enough to let them properly integrate their work. The result was a structure that looked beautiful, but didn't quite fit together the way a long-haul coach needed to. Corporate insisted on using a multi-section frame instead of a complete monocoque, a cost-saving move that engineers warned could lead to weakness at the joints. Those warnings were brushed aside. When the first cracks began appearing, long, ugly fractures at the very spots engineers had circled in pencil, GM pointed fingers everywhere except inward. They blamed loading practices, maintenance routines, even road conditions, anything but the rushed design choices that caused the problem. Instead of funding a full redesign, GM offered only small fixes and let Greyhound deal with the mess. And so the great Scenicruiser, one of the most recognizable buses ever built, had its legacy shaped not by the road, but by the decisions that crippled it before the first mile. Flxible Metro E, G, the bus that paid for Grumman's sins. When the Flxible Metro arrived, it should have been a clean slate, a chance to wipe away the embarrassment of the 870 and prove the company still knew how to build a solid American transit bus. And truth be told, the Metro was a better machine in almost every way. But the people who built it were no longer in control of their own destiny. By the time development began, Grumman had already sold Flxible to General Automotive, a move that brought smaller budgets and tighter constraints than the engineers ever expected. Corporate ordered the Metro to be built using much of the old tooling to save money. That meant the frame, while improved, couldn't be redesigned the way the engineering team wanted. Small issues lingered. Fit and finish varied. Things that should have been corrected in a full clean sheet redesign were carried forward because the budget simply wasn't there. Marketing didn't help. Nervous about stirring up the ghosts of the 870 recall, they kept the Metro quiet. No bold campaigns, no big promises, just cautious introductions and whispered assurances. Agencies noticed the hesitation. In the end, the Metro E never failed on its own merits. It carried the weight of another bus's scandal, buried under decisions made far above the shop floor. A good bus, punished for sins it never committed. Orion VI. Too ambitious, too early, and unsupported by its own maker. Back in the mid-1990s, the Orion VI looked like the future, full low-floor hybrid power and a promise that American transit was ready to leap into a new era. But the truth was harder. The technology simply wasn't there yet, and corporate pushed the bus out long before the pieces had time to mature. The decision was bold, yes, but it was also reckless. Orion insisted on a full hybrid low-floor layout at a time when batteries, cooling systems, and high-voltage controls were still in their infancy. The electrical network was complex, delicate, and painfully unforgiving. Buses overheated, wiring looms cooked themselves, control modules glitched for reasons no one could pin down. And instead of doubling down on R&D to iron out the problems, corporate tightened the purse strings. Transit mechanics received little training, and many garages were left guessing their way through systems they'd never seen before. Meanwhile, Orion shifted its focus to the newer, cleaner, and simpler Orion VII, leaving the 6 stranded without updates, support, or long-term investment. What could have been a pioneering step forward became a cautionary tale instead. The Orion VI didn't fail because it tried something new. It failed because its own maker walked away before the job was done. In the end, the buses on this list weren't doomed by rough roads or hard winters. They were undone long before they ever met a passenger. Budget cuts, rushed decisions, shifting leadership. Those were the forces that bent frames, crippled fleets, and turned promising machines into cautionary footnotes. And if you've been around this industry long enough, you know the lesson by heart. A bus is only as strong as the people standing behind it. When the support disappears, even the best engineering can't save the day. So as we close the book on these 10 troubled models, I want to hear from you. Which ones did you drive, ride, or wrench on? Which stories did we miss? Share your memories in the comments, and stick around. There are plenty more tales from the garage still waiting to be told.